before. "I don't understand!" Sin fairly shrieked. "I don't understand!" Yurei remained untouched, the same crumbling skeleton that the party had first come across. The clouds, the lightning, the wind, all had died or faded away. Only the immense shadow cast by Namir still laid claim to the ancient kingdom, and with each passing second, it tightened its grip, sinking Yurei deeper and deeper into darkness. "Him!" The Vajeri poked a gnarled finger at the necromancer. "It was him! He caused it all to go astray. He interrupted at the time most crucial." "My interruption," responded the studious-looking figure, "did nothing, I regret to say." Despite his dire warnings and his clear attempt to get the others to flee, to Kentril, even he seemed a bit disappointed by the lack of any fantastic change in Yurei. "I am as mystified as you are." With no apparent reason remaining for them to stay in position, the mercenaries swarmed around the necromancer. Even Gorst, who found the Vajeri sorcerer fascinating, studied the other spellcaster with little enthusiasm. All knew how the necromancers trafficked with the dead, blurred the lines between the mortal world and the afterlife. His own sword drawn, Captain Dumont confronted the arrogant intruder. "Who are you? How long have you been spying on us?" "My name is Zail." He stared down the length of Kentril's blade as if unconcerned. "This is my home." "That doesn't answer my second question." The mercenary leader hesitated, his mind suddenly racing. "Necromancers toyed with the dead. Could that mean—" Suddenly certain he knew the truth, Kentril put the tip of his blade just under Zail's jaw. "It was you. You sent Hargo's ghost into our dreams, didn't you? You sent that warning to get us to leave." At this, the other fighters grew incensed. Sin, standing slightly back, cocked his head, studying his rival spellcaster with more interest. "I did what had to be done. At least I thought so at the time." "So," announced Sin, "you too felt certain that the path opened by Gregis Monsi could be reopened this day." "I thought so." Kentril heard a slight chuckle, but one that did not seem to come from the direction of any of his men. Zail's hand slipped momentarily to a large, bulging pouch at his side, which looked as if it contained a melon or some similarly shaped object. When the necromancer noted the captain's interest, he casually pulled his hand away. "I had my confidence in that fact," Zail reluctantly agreed. "As unfounded, it seems, as all your research." "So there's no gold?" Benjamin asked mournfully. Kentril scowled at the other mercenary. "Shut up. As for you," he tapped Zail's throat with the sword tip, "I think you know even more than you're saying." "Undoubtedly true, Captain," quoth Sin. "It would be best if you kept this creature under guard, even bound, perhaps." "Yes, that would be right course, I think." For once, Kentril found himself in utter agreement with his employer. Everyone knew that necromancers could not be trusted. Zail might already have a poison or a potion just up his sleeve. In the course of their brief conversation, the shadow of the mountain had continued to stretch forth, so much so that it now began to blanket the party. A chill wind arose as the shadow settled on them, one that made some of the mercenaries shake. Zail's cloak began to flutter wildly, and Kentril had to tighten the collar of his shirt. "Namir has a cold touch," the necromancer commented. "If you plan to stay near Yurei, you better be better dressed." "What's the point?" Oscar muttered. "Just a bunch of rocks and empty tombs." All this way for nothing. We're gonna need more than cloaks, agreed another fighter. This gets any darker, we'll even need torches. Indeed, the mountain had caused the area to turn almost black as night. Truly a contrast when one saw the sun shining but just a few yards farther. Ure lay in such darkness that one could barely even make out distinct shapes in the city, and the longer the band stood where it was, the more the shadow covering them thickened to the same murkiness. Let's withdraw to camp, Kentrell suggested. And that includes you too, Master Zael. The pale necromancer bowed slightly, and, under guard by 4 of Captain's men, started off. Gorst quickly helped quoth Sin with his scrolls and talismans, following after the Vizier like an obedient puppy. Kentrell himself stood his ground until everyone else had departed, then took one last sweeping survey of the vicinity in order to make certain that nothing had been left behind. His gaze froze as it fell upon the ruins. A glimmer of light flickered in one of the distant towers. He blinked, thinking this simply a momentary trick of his imagination, only then to see 2 lights, the second far to the right in another part of the city. And as every nerve tingled and every hair on his neck stood on an end, Captain Kentrell Dumont watched a dead city blossom with illumination. Light after flickering light burst to life, transforming fabled Ure before his very eyes. Sin! He shouted, gaze still fixed on the fantastic display. Sin! Now, more visible, the ruined city also proved not so ruined anymore. The gaping hole in the wall had vanished, and what had been a crumbling watchtower again stood proud and sentinel. From the top of the battlements, Kentrell almost swore he saw banners fluttering in the ever-increasing wind. It's true, muttered a very familiar voice to the side. Kentrell glanced down to see the wizened Vizier, the latter's expression akin to that of a child who had just received the greatest toy. Staring at the wondrous sight, it's true. Around Captain Dumont, the rest of the party quickly gathered, many of the veteran mercenaries gazing slack-jawed at Ure. Even the necromancer Zael watched the city with something akin to astonishment. That no one at the moment guarded the black-clad spellcaster did not bother Kentrell in the least, for clearly Zael had no intention of flight. And it had done with the rest, the miracle before them had ensnared the necromancer. The legend spoke truth, Zael whispered. You were right, Humbart. What are we waiting for? Sin suddenly demanded. This is why we came so far. Why we struggled so long. Dumont, your men were promised gold and more. Well, there it is for the taking. This finally stirred the mercenaries. He's right, laughed Benjamin. Gold, a city full of gold. Even Kentrell found the allure of treasure enough to push back the anxiety he felt. Ure had been a kingdom said to be among the wealthiest in the history of the world. Tales had been told of other humans who had come seeking its riches, but none of those tales had left any the belief that the searches had been successful. That meant that enough might be found to make each man here as wealthy as a king or a sultan. You cannot be serious, Zael interjected. Ure's riches are for Ure alone. You rob the dead. They're not dead, remember? Kentrell pointed out. They departed. And if that's the case, anything they left behind, they surely didn't want. That means Sin's right. It's ours. The necromancer looked as if he wanted to argue further, but clearly had with which to counter the captain's claim. He finally nodded, albeit with much reluctance. Turning to the Vajera, Kentrell asked, "Those lights, does that mean any trouble?" "Nonsense! The story clearly indicates that the people left the mortal plane in the space of but a few minutes. If we see Ure as they abandon it, surely many lamps and torches were left lit. Beyond the mortal plane, time is but a word. Why, we may even find food left in bowels, and good ale for your men. What do you say to that?" The other fighters cheered at this possible bonus. Something about the sorcerer's logic briefly troubled Captain Dumont, but, unable to decide just what, the mercenary officer shrugged off the slight concern. Even he could not help but feeling much enthusiasm. "All right," he cried to the others. "Get what each of you needs. Bring a rope and torches with you. I'm not going to trust those lights alone. And don't forget sacks. Hurry!" With far more eagerness than before, Kentrell's men went into action. Quoth Sin also prepared himself, retrieving his magical staff and placing about his neck 3 amulets he had been carrying in a pouch at his belt. Despite their many disagreements, the captain planned to search alongside Sin once they entered Ure. Kentrell felt certain that wherever the Vajera sought his magical artifacts and tomes, they would also find great riches. To everyone's surprise, when the small troop reassembled, the necromancer stood waiting for them. In their eagerness to ready themselves, the mercenaries had more or less forgot to guard him, but it seemed that Zael, too, continued to be drawn to the possible offerings of the magical kingdom. Once more, he had a hand on the bulging pouch, but as Kentrell approached him, the slim figure let the cloak cover it. "I'll be going with you," he stated firmly. Kentrell did not like that notion, but to his surprise, Sin readily agreed. "Of course you will," the Vajera declared. "Your knowledge and expertise will prove most invaluable. You'll come with Captain and Dumont, myself, naturally." Zael executed a slight bow, his face impassive. "Of course." While none of the mercenaries protested in the necromancer's presence, they kept their distance from him as the band, torches already lit, headed towards Ure. With the outer wall no longer visibly damaged, Kentrell, under Zael's guidance, led them toward the main gate. Although the fear existed that, with the city seemingly whole, the gate might also be blocked. They came around to the entrance, discovered it opened, and the drawbridge down as well. "Almost as if we're invited in," commented Kentrell. Quoth Sin's daughter, "Oh, well, by all means, let us not stand here gaping." Weapons drawn and torches held ahead, the group entered. To the naked eye, it might have seemed as if the inhabitants had just stepped out, or even simply gone to sleep. Buildings that on previous visits had been crushed in, or at least cracking, stood tall and new. Rows of high oil lanterns that had previously been rusted, crumbling wrecks now brightly illuminated the avenues. Other lights boldly shone from towers and structures deeper in the city. Even the very street upon which the band walked looked as if it had been freshly swept. Yet not one sound did they hear. No words, no laughter, no crying, not even the calls of birds or insects. Reborn Ure itself might seem, the stillness within reminded all of the stunning fates of the inhabitants. A short distance in, the main avenue split off into 3 directions. Kentrell studied each in turn before saying, "Gorst, take 4 men down the right for about 100 paces. No more. Albert, you, Benjamin, and 4 more, check the left. And the rest of you, come with Sin and me. No one goes farther than I said, and we all meet back here as soon as possible. He did not include Zael in any of the groups, especially his own, but the necromancer followed him regardless. Kentrell took the point, Oscar and another, flanking him just a step behind. Eyes darting from one side of the street to the other, the captain kept careful count of each step as they proceeded. Building after building they passed. Light gleamed in some of them, but each time one of the party investigated, they found no sign of life. "Check those doors," Kentrell commanded, Oscar pointing to what looked to be a business on the left. Lit within more than any of the previous structures, it drew the captain's attention like a moth to a proverbial flame. Guarded by another mercenary, Oscar tried one of the doors. It swung open with little effort. Leaning in, the veteran surveyed the interior for a moment. Then, in a relaxed voice, called back, "A potter's shop, Captain. Stacks of fancy pieces on the walls. There's even one sitting on the wheel, looking freshly shaped." An avaricious look spread over his ugly features. "Think we should see if they left any coin in the till?" "Leave it. It'll still be there when we get around to it, if you want such meager coin once we've gone through the entire place." The mercenaries laughed at this suggestion, and even Sin cracked a rare smile. But Zael remained almost devoid of emotion. Kentrell noticed that his hand touched the large pouch again. "What's that you got in there, necromancer?" "A keepsake. Nothing more." "I think it's more than a..." "Ah!" A shriek filled the air, echoing time and time again through the empty avenues of Ure. "That sounds like one of ours!" gasped Oscar. The captain had already begun to turn around. "It is, you fools! Run!" The cry did not repeat, but now came the sounds of cursing men, the clatter of arms, and what very briefly might have been the low, sinister rumble of some animal. Gorst and the rest joined Kentrell's men at the original intersection. No one spoke, each breath now saved only for action. They came across tall, gangly Albort, a white-haired fighter from an area north of Captain Dumont's own, shouting at 4 other mercenaries, all whom had hunted looks in their eyes. Near Albort's feet, a torn and ravaged form lay sprawled near the right side of the avenue. It took Kentrell a moment to realize by process of elimination that the mangled, bloody mess had once been Benjen. "What happened?" the captain demanded. "Something came out and tore him apart. It moved so quick none of us saw much at all." "'Twas a cat," insisted another man, his expression turned dumbfounded. "A huge, hellish cat." "All I saw was a blur," insisted Albert. "No blur rips another man's guts open like that." Kentrell looked to Sin. "Well?" The sorcerer raised his staff, drawing a circle in the air. He stared upward for a moment, then said, "Whatever it was, it's not around here anymore, Dumont." "Can you be so certain?" asked Zael. "Not all things are so easily detected by magic." "Do you sense anything, cretin?" Zael pulled free the ivory dagger Kentrell had earlier seen. Before the eyes of the startled mercenaries, he pricked a finger with a tip. As a few droplets of blood coursed down the blade, the necromancer muttered silent words. The dagger flared bright, then faded to normal again. "I sense nothing," the pale figure reported, "but that does not mean that there is nothing." Swearing, Kentrell turned to Albert. "Which way did it head after it killed Benjen?" "Toward that building there on the left, I think." "Nah," interrupted a fellow mercenary. "It turned and went farther up into the dark." "You're daft," came the one who had identified it as a cat. "It whirled around and darted back the way it came. That's how I saw it for what it was. The rest of the party looked at Albert's group as if all of them had gone mad. One of Gort's men spat on the building next to which he stood, snarling, I'm beginning to wonder if maybe they didn't kill him themselves, eh, Captain? It would not be the first time that mercenaries had murdered one another over treasure, but Captain Dumont did not sense that this was the case this time. Still, it made sense to question each those involved further. Where were each of you when Benjamin bought it? Spread out like you've always taught us, Captain, Albert replied. Jonas there, me next to him. Benjamin right there, where Toko, he indicated the man who had accused him of murder, is. And at that moment, a flash of black burst out of the doorway next to Toko, catching him across the chest. The fighter screamed in much the same way as Benjamin had, as curled claws, a foot in length, tore through padded leather and flesh, revealing to his horrified companions wet, red ribs and ravaged organs. Toko actually managed to look down at this horrendous wound before death claimed him, and he toppled forward. A beast that, yes, could vaguely be described as a cat, emerged from the building, hissing at the humans. Yet no cat stood 7 feet in height and had eyes red without pupils. In the light of the lamps, its fur looked jagged, almost sharp, and fire black. The hellcat roared once, a blood-curdling sound, and revealed not one, but 2 sets of long feline teeth. Pincer pattern! Pincer pattern! Called Kentrell. The familiar tone of their captain giving commands brought the rest of the soldiers back to the moment at hand. They quickly formed themselves as he had ordered, working to cut off the monstrous beast's escape. Barbed tail swishing back and forth, the cat stepped forward to his foes. The eyes went from man to man, studying each. What's that thing doing? Maybe it's deciding who it's going to eat next. Silence in the ranks, Kentrell demanded. The beast paused in its study of the others to take special care in viewing him. Captain Dumont met the inhuman gaze and, despite his inner fears, matched it. At last, it proved to be the creature who looked away first. It slowly backed up, almost as if intending to return to the building from whence it had came. That could not be allowed. Kentrell knew better than to follow any foe back into his lair. Worse, if the cat escaped, it would likely catch them again later, when their guards were down. Albert! Osco! You in? With another horrific cry, the cat suddenly crouched and then leapt for him. Kentrell had no time to recover. Claws flared from the paws of the monster, the same razor-sharp sickles that had ripped to bloody goblets 2 of his men. He saw his own terrible death coming, and knew that his reactions would be too slow to delay the dire event. Then, a form as much a shadow as the beast met the cat in midair. Although smaller, the second hit with such force that both fell directly to the street. A flash of white appeared at the end of the new figure's limb. Not a claw or a talon, as Kentrell first believed, but rather a dagger made of ivory. Zail had sacrificed himself to save the captain. Never had Kentrell seen such agility and speed in any man. Despite still wearing his voluminous cloak, the necromancer danced around the savage claws of the cat. The hellish creature snapped at Zail, tasting only air. The pale spellcaster leapt atop the gargantuan foe, and this time struck true with the ivory dagger. A flash of emerald green light flared where the peculiar blade bit in, and although Zail clearly managed only a shallow wound, the cat howled as if pierced through the heart. It writhed wildly, finally sending the necromancer tumbling to the side. Kentrell dove in, determined that no man should die for his sorry sake. As he attacked, Oskal, Jodis, and two others joined in, while another fighter dragged Zael to momentary safety. The cat swiped at the necromancer, howling when the claws missed. Kentril thrust, managing only to catch its unwanted attention again. As one paw reached with lightning swiftness for their leader, Oskal and Jodis attacked from the opposing sides. The beast's head turned toward the latter, who stumbled back as quickly as he could. On the other side, Oskal, still undetected, jabbed as hard as he could into the possible unprotected flank. His sword went in a foot and more. The cat shrieked, turning upon the mercenary. Withdrawing his blade, Oskal fled from the reach of either the jaws or the curved claws. The retreat proved to be a fatal mistake. With the full force of a footman's mace, the barbed tail swung down hard on the unwary fighter. The weapon-like appendage crushed the back of the mercenary's skull with an audible crack. Blood splattered the two men nearest Oskal. Eyes still wide, the already dead soldier fell forward, his sword clattering to the ground. Enraged, Kentril charged again, thrusting with all of his might at the cat's throat. The beast turned to meet him, but something distracted it again from the other side. Caught between two directions, the monstrous feline hesitated. With as much force as he could muster, Captain Dumont drove the full length of his sword into the thick, muscular throat. The hellish cat pulled back, taking Kentril's weapon with it. Hacking, its life clearly flowing from the great wound, the badly injured beast spat and swiped at everything in its sight. Albort barely missed having his head taken from his body. The mercenaries retreated a step, hoping that death would come quick. But even with such a wound, the cat did not forget Kentril. Still alive, still quick, it focused on the cause of its agony. The unblinking eyes locked on Kentril's own. In those crimson orbs, the captain saw clearly his death coming. Then Gorst acted, the barbarian giving a howl worthy of the cat and leaping atop from behind. The monstrous creature tried to twist backward to get the shirtless giant. However, Gorst wrapped his arms around the neck and used the hilt of Kentril's sword as a grip. Not only did he keep his foe from reaching him, but with his prodigious strength, he worked the already deep blade around, further tearing at the cat's dripping wound. At last, the monstrous beast stumbled. It fell. It tried to rise, but failed. Even then, Gorst held on tight, his muscles strained, seeming almost already to tear apart. But still, he held his position. The barbed tail flew at him once, twice, but positioned where he was, Gorst remained beyond its limited reach. "Let's finish it!" Kentril demanded. Zael alongside them, the rest of the mercenaries closed in, everyone still avoiding the tail. Seizing Oskal's sword, Kentril joined the others in stabbing the cat time after time again. For what seemed an hour, but in truth was probably only a minute, maybe two, they tried to put an end to the murderous creature. Then, when Kentril had just begun to believe that nothing could completely slay the monster, the cat exhaled once and fell motionless. Still untrusting, the survivors watched with blades ready as Gorst dismounted. When the hellish beast made no move for Captain Dumont's second, they knew at last they had slain it. "Are you well?" asked a much too calm voice. Kentril turned to see Zael, the necromancer, looking untouched both physically and mentally by the disastrous event. At another time, that might have irritated the mercenary, but Zael had saved his life, and Kentril would never forget that. "Thank you, Master Zael. I would have surely have been dead if not for your quick reaction." This brought a brief ghost of a smile. "I am simply Zael. One born to the jungles finds it necessary to learn to react even quicker than the animals, Captain. or one gets eaten at an early age. Not certain whether the necromancer had just made a jest or not, Kentrell nodded politely, then turned toward the one in the party who had done nothing to avert the tragedy. Sin! Damn you! Sin, where is all your vaunted power? I thought you Vajira had all sorts of magical spells. 3 men are dead! Yet again, the diminutive sorcerer managed somehow to look down his nose at the much taller fighter. And I stood ready, in case there existed more than one of these beasts. Or did you think you're a little troop, capable of fending off a second at the same time? Captain, Albort cut in. Captain, let's leave this place. No gold is worth this. Leave? Snarled another fighter. I'm not going back without something. How about your head on your shoulders still, hey? Kentrell whirled on his men. Quiet, all of you! Leaving would probably be a wise choice, suggested Zael. Sin waved the wooden staff at the necromancer. Nonsense! So much awaits us in this city. Likely the animal already lived here before the change, and we just never ran across it. And since no other came to its defense, I dare say it lived alone, after all. There should be nothing else to fear here. Nothing! And, at that moment, music began to play. Where's that from? Blurted Jodis. Sounds like it's coming from everywhere, replied another one of his comrades. Indeed, the music seemed to close in on the band from all sides. A simple, yet haunting tune, not entirely unmerry, played on what sounded like a single flute. Kentrell felt 2 urges at once. One, to dance to the tune, and the other, to run away as far and as fast as he could. A man's light laughter briefly joined the music. To Kentrell's far right, a figure moved. A human figure. Albort pointed down the street. Captain, there's folk over there by that old inn. Horse and rider coming this way, shouted another mercenary. That old man, he wasn't there before. All around the party, figures that had not been visible moments before now walked, rode, or simply stood nearby. They wore free-flowing garments of all shades, and Kentrell identified the old, young, strong, and infirm all in the space of one sweeping glance. And through each one, he could see the buildings beyond. Not all the riches in the world are enough for this, Sin. The captain summoned the men toward him. We head for the front gate together. No one strays. No one tries to turn off and search for a few trinkets. Understand? None of the fighters argued. To ransack an abandoned city was one thing, but to be trapped in a city of ghosts? No! Spat the Vajira. We're so close! Nevertheless, he did not wait behind when the mercenaries and Zael started off. Thinking of the necromancer, Kentrell asked, Zael, you deal with the likes of these. Any suggestions? Your command is the most prudent course, Captain. Can you do anything about the ghosts? The pale figure's brow furrowed. I can ward them off, I believe, but something about them leaves me uneasy. It would be best if we could escape Ure without any confrontation. This warning from the necromancer did not ease Kentrell's concerns in the least. If even Zael found Ure's ghost unsettling, then the sooner the band made it through the gates, the better. So far, though, the phantasmal figures had done nothing, did not even seem to notice the intruders. And while the flute continued to play, its song growing stronger with each passing moment, it too had caused the fleeing group no actual harm. There's the gate! Albort shuddered. There's the... He got no further. As one, the mercenaries froze. the blood draining from their faces as they beheld the way to safety, a way open to them no more. Yes, there indeed stood the gate, but not as they had left it. Now the drawbridge stood high, and the gate itself had been bolted shut. Worse, a throng had assembled before it, a throng of pale, spectral forms with drawn faces and hollow eyes. The ghostly inhabitants of the shadow-enshrouded kingdom. The hollow eyes turned as one toward the treasure hunters, stared at Kentrell and his companions with dreadful intensity. Above the music, the light laughter of a man continued.